This country right now needs an opposition that can not only protest, but win elections. Joe Biden and those around him had one job. That job was to stop Donald Trump, and they failed at that job.
What will the Democrats do, and who is the Democrat to lead the charge?
The hour is late. We're right on the edge. We have to be ruthless.
Hi, everybody. Welcome into the Sanity Podcast with Dave Briggs and Allison Camerata. So as the world watches what's going on with the Trump administration, including his acceptance of the $400 million plane from Qatar with all sorts of national security implications and danger for it to be Air Force One.
And legal and ethical implications as well.
Right, and those. And of course, the crypto corruption where his family has already enriched its wealth by at least $300 million. The numbers go up from there. The question always arises, Dave, and you've posed it many times.
Yeah.
What will the Democrats do, and who is the Democrat to lead the charge? Who will spearhead this?
Nothing and no one.
Well, that's
nothing
impossible.
And no one. Yeah,
that's
look.
impossible for 35% of the country to have nothing and no one.
I know that sounded like a bit of a side swipe on the Democratic Party, but that's where they are, lost in the woods, powerless by the numbers. And they do have some impressive leadership out there, in particular Chris Murphy, who's a senator here from the state of Connecticut. But I don't see any power that they have, and in part because of where the Supreme Court left us with presidential power. But it's also because the Democrats can't unify around one message. And when opposing Trump is your message, I just think you're going to get drowned out. And all the energy, as you know, is on the AOC Bernie Sanders wing that I think makes Trump even stronger.
Well, we have the perfect guest today to talk about all of this.
We're joined by former Congressman Beto O'Rourke from El Paso, Texas. He is the founder of Powered by People. Great to have you, sir. I know you've been having some town halls across the state of Texas. What are you hearing from constituents about your party?
You know, people want to see us fight. They want to fight back. And I think this kind of false choice that's been offered to Democrats about whether we need to be more centrist or more progressive really should be replaced with the question of whether you're willing to fight or whether you're going to surrender. Because folks are getting hurt right now. They're being absolutely smashed by these tariffs. You know, they're going out of business. They're having a hard time affording the things that they used to be able to depend on. These cuts to public education in the state of Texas are just decimating local schools. And then when you go beyond that to these foundational questions that we face as a country, like, are we going to be a country that is ruled by the law, or will be ruled by some kind of petty tyrant? Will we have free and fair elections? Is this still government of, by, and for the people? Folks care about that stuff too. And they recognize that the hour is late. We're right on the edge. And that if we don't push back, we're going to get pushed over that edge and lose what Lincoln called the last best hope of Earth. So they don't want to see us wait until 2026. They're not looking for us to cook up something that's been message tested in some Democratic factory in DC. They want to see people honestly and authentically fighting back and ultimately winning and replacing what we have in DC right now with something that really works for people. And Dave, I'm encouraged because I actually see that happening across the country in these town halls like we just held in Amarillo, Texas, and Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where I just was. And then all over the country, people stepping up, standing up to be counted, and taking action at this moment of truth. So I know these are some pretty dark days, but I do see signs of encouragement that leave me optimistic and hopeful.
And explain that, Congressman, if you would. Explain how it's manifesting and how it's visible, because there are a lot of people who feel very hopeless right now, particularly Democrats. And so, I mean, when you say that it requires people who are going to stand up and fight, you know, there's this whole internecine war between the James Carvilles of the party and the David Hoggs of the party, where it feels like it might not be a big enough tent. So what are you seeing that gives you hope?
You know, I saw some of that. And I wonder if that's really going to just end up being confined to the internet and to those of us who closely follow politics, and that the vast majority of the rest of the country just really wants to know, like, hey, is the minimum wage in Texas going to stay $7.25 an hour, or are you going to do something about it? Are you going to continue to close all these public schools in my community, or are you going to fight to get the funding to keep them open? Are you going to make sure that I can vote in this next election in 2026 so I can choose someone better than the people who have failed me already? They really want to see us fight. And what's encouraging to me, Allison, is that, maybe you're not seeing the leadership that many would want from those who already hold power and are in these elected positions of public trust, but you are seeing that from everyday people. I mentioned I was in Tuscaloosa, Alabama recently. I was invited there by students. These are 18, 19, 20-year-olds at the University of Alabama who didn't like that Trump had invited himself to their commencement, wanted to overshadow and outshine their day of celebration, all the hard work and success that they had achieved for his own ego. And they asked me to come out and be part of a counter rally that these students had organized. 1,500 people showed up in what is supposed to be deep red, lost cause Alabama. Look, the DNC's not there. National Democrats aren't investing in that state, but the people themselves aren't giving up. And I see that across the country in these hands-off marches and other protests and actions that people are taking. We keep doing that stuff, and sooner or later, real leaders are going to emerge. There are going to be moments that absolutely shock the conscience of the country and around which we will rally and will be galvanizing. And that's what we're going to need going into 2026. But the thing is, we just can't wait for 2026 to do that. It's all hands on deck and fighting on every front now, because the hour is so late and the urgency is so great at this moment. We have to show up.
That trip to deep red southern states was ridiculed by Karl Rove. I don't know if you saw this on Fox News, but he took a few shots at you. Let's listen in.
Well, I don't recognize that guy. I do recognize a guy named Robert Francis O'Rourke. And let's remember his record. He lost a Senate race in Texas. His presidential campaign imploded because of over amount of navel gazing, and he lost the governor's race. So what he's recommending is that the Democrats prioritize Mississippi and Alabama. Good luck on that. There's going to be no chance in our lifetime to turn those states blue. But look, the Democratic Party is in bad shape. It has to begin anew. The question is going to be, do they follow Bernie Sanders, who basically his criticism that you ran at the beginning was we weren't left-wing enough in a past election? We've had 4 years of one of the most progressive administrations in the history of our country under Joe Biden, and a left-wing candidate for president, and it didn't work. So we'll see how the Democrats sort this all out. But right now, it's a circular firing squad led by, in my mind, people like O'Rourke, who are not Jasmine Crockett, for God's sake. I mean, we're talking about the lesser lights of the Democratic Party who are attempting to use this moment to try and shine a little bit more light on them and advance their own political careers at the expense of their party.
Wow, that was something from Karl Rove on Fox News. What's your reaction to all that, Beto?
If we don't prioritize Alabama, Mississippi, and Texas, then we will be consigned to absolute irrelevancy as a party. And this country can't afford that. This country right now needs an opposition that can not only protest, but win elections. And I'll bring this to a point. If in 2032, which is coming up really soon, the Democratic nominee for president wins all of the so-called blue wall states that we poured hundreds of millions, more than $1 billion into in 2024, they can win each and every single one of them and still lose the White House, because as populations shift and after the census, as we reapportion electoral college votes, if you're unable to win in places like Texas, which will have 44 electoral college votes, there is no viable path to the White House. So we start investing in these places now, today in 2025, or we lose all hope of being a successful party that can govern this country. So, when Karl Rove points out these campaigns that we have run and lost in the state of Texas, I don't know that that's the whole story. In 2018 against Ted Cruz, though we didn't defeat him at the end of the day, we helped 12 insurgent Democrats defeat 12 incumbent Republicans in the state house. We helped people like Colin Allred defeat entrenched incumbent Republicans like Pete Sessions in the U.S. Congress. In Houston, Texas, the most diverse city in the country, 17 Black women won election to judicial positions, literally changing the face of criminal justice. So in the effort, in the trying, very good things can come. And if it were easy to win Texas, if you could do it in a single shot, well, we would be there by now. But it's been 30 years that Democrats have been in the political wilderness in this state without winning a statewide election. It's going to be very tough to come out of this. If we give up, if we stop trying, if we concede to the Karl Roves of the world, well, then the game's over before it has even begun. That's why I and many others like me keep trying, keep pushing, and try to draw attention and resources to places like Texas, because they matter not just for Texas, but for the rest of us in America.
Beto, that's really good context for all of us to hear. And so because you've been talking to voters and traveling around, not just at town halls, but also on college campuses, as you say, what's going on? Is there a way, do you have your finger on the pulse of Gen Z and figure out like what's up with young men and why did they vote for Donald Trump?
You know, it's interesting. We have a group called Powered by People, and we are registering young voters on these college campuses all across the state of Texas, in part because this is the toughest state in the nation in which to register a voter. There's no online voter registration, no automatic, no same-day voter registration. And also it's the most voter suppressed and voter intimidated state in the country. It's harder to cast a ballot here than anywhere else. So we not only register these young voters, but then we ask them if we can personally stay in touch with them to serve as their Sherpas to the polling place. But as we're on these campuses, and I'm one of the volunteer deputy registrars doing this work, it's interesting the questions I get from these young students, including young men. One of them, which kind of surprised me the first time I heard it, was, "Hey, Beto, how do you know what the truth is?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean, how do I know what the truth is?" And then I realized this young man is not subscribing to the daily paper. It may not exist in his hometown anymore. He's not watching broadcast news. He's not watching cable news for that matter. Whatever political information, whatever facts or truth he's trying to discern is coming through on TikTok, on podcasts, perhaps like yours, on Instagram. And he can be forgiven for being confused or being persuaded and compelled by whoever has, the most well-produced meme or viral video on Instagram, regardless of whether or not it is honest or true or reflective of the facts. I don't know a way to combat that challenge other than showing up and being where people are. In this case, on college campuses or on these town hall meetings that we're holding all over the state of Texas. And as we come together, talking about things like vaccines. I was just in Lubbock and in Amarillo, which was the epicenter of the measles spread here in Texas. In 20 years, we hadn't lost a child to that virus. This year so far, we have lost 2 kids. Someone stood up and said, "Hey, I want to hear your take, Beto, on this problem that we're having." And I said, unequivocally, without a doubt, the MMR vaccine for measles is safe. And you need to, talk to your doctor first, but you need to make sure that your child has that so that they are protected and so other children are protected as well. So connecting with young people where they are, listening to them, sharing with them our perspective, answering their questions, bringing them together and giving them a reason to vote. That's the way out of this, because not only did we lose too many young people to Donald Trump in 2024, we lost even more who chose not to vote at all. The only way to meet that is to meet those people where they are and give them a reason to vote.
Just to tag on to what Allison said, Trump won men 18 to 29, 56 to 42, a landslide, quite frankly. And David Hogg, who's the vice chair of the DNC, has a theory about that, and he voiced it with Bill Maher.
Right now, what I think happened last election is younger men, they would rather vote for somebody who even if they don't completely agree with, they don't feel judged by, than somebody who they do agree with, that they feel like they have to walk on eggshells around constantly because they're going to be judged or ostracized or excommunicated. And what's interesting about this moment is it feels like the two parties in some senses have flipped, where, Republicans used to be the judgmental in many ways.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to what he's saying, and I think we should listen to him. He's a lot closer in age to the very people that you and I are talking about right now, that Democrats are trying and failing to reach. And so, whether it's some of the leaders that we have right now who, for whatever reason, are unable or ineffective at communicating, including, unfortunately, our former president, who had one of arguably the most successful administrations in modern American history, but absolutely failed miserably in communicating those successes and connecting with the young people who had the most to gain or to lose based on what that administration was able to do. To have a campaign that was hobbled from the outset by how late Kamala Harris was given the chance to actually run, and then perhaps failed in the opportunity to demonstrate real change, especially for young people who can be forgiven for wondering whether this political system and process works at all for any of them. These young people on college campuses who tell me that their grandparents and their folks were able to afford a home, but they'll never be able to buy one, or who wonder about the influence and money in politics, or who say, hey, Beto, I've heard you and others talk about school shootings since I was 8 years old, and nothing has changed in this state, no matter if we vote or don't vote. How do I know this stuff works at all? When you have a choice, as David was just saying, between someone who represents radical change, even if you don't like every aspect of the change that he represents, and then someone who looks like or seems like or feels like more of the same, it's understandable why so many people pick change. But last thing on this, I think folks in good faith chose that change, hoping it would make their lives better. Now that it is very clear to most of us that it has not made our lives better, but in fact made our lives worse, whether we measure it economically, whether we look at it in terms of our democracy, this is the golden opportunity for Democrats and everyone else in opposition to Trump to present a compelling alternative. And so my hat's off to everyone who is out there meeting with the American people right now, listening to them and trying to reflect what they're hearing back out to them, not in 2026, but in 2025, so that we're organized, ready, and able to win in 2026 and 2028.
Just want to button up the hog conversation. The DNC voted to void his election as vice chair. So there is a current feud going on
because they don't like
party.
That he's trying to primary
That is
Democrats.
true,
Yeah.
Right. So there's very much an internal food fight.
So Beto, what is the one thing? I mean, there's all this talk about how Democrats can't just be anti-Trump, and I know you agree with that. So is there one thing that could help economically? Is there a plan for working class Americans that Donald Trump will never do that Democrats should start touting?
Allison, I know in answer to your question, you might expect me to say, well, you've got to raise the minimum wage. Of course, you got to do that. You've got to expand access to health care. We're the least insured state in the country. So people are going into medical bankruptcies right and left in Texas. Of course, you've got to do that well. You've got to end this disastrous tariff policy, which is driving small businesses into the ground. Many of them are closing their doors. I just met a woman who owns a toy shop called Unique Toys in Amarillo, Texas for 30 years, 145% tariffs. She cannot afford that and keep the doors open. We got to reflect that as well. But more than all of that, you've got to actually be there with those people, listen to them and understand what they're going through. Make sure that they know that they are seen, that they're heard, that you listen to them. And I don't think, Allison, people will feel it unless you show up and are there with them. Democrats have gotten lazy. We've taken working class voters for granted because they've always been with us, because we're the party of FDR and Truman and Johnson and the war on poverty, the minimum wage, the unions, all the things that we've fought for and won. Democrats have taken black voters for granted because we just assume, hey, we're the party of civil rights and voting rights. And you remember that. Now we're going to take you for granted and go chase somebody else. We've taken Mexican-American voters for granted because we're the party that brought along comprehensive immigration reform in the 60s and then worked with Reagan in the 80s to get that done. And we always talk a good game about it, but we have failed to deliver for these people. And so if we keep trying to communicate at a distance over the airwaves from central messaging in Washington, D.C., we're going to continue to get the same results. But when we follow the leads of those people out there who are with the people, whether at these town halls across the state of Texas, whether you see what Tim Walz or Bernie or AOC or Ro Khanna or Eric Swalwell or so many others are doing right now.
When you talk about those the party cannot trust, given what happened with Joe Biden, day by day, we learn new revelations from this book coming, Original Sin from Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson, The latest is his deterioration was so severe in 23 and 24, advisors around him discussed the possibility he'd need a wheelchair if reelected. What do you make of the cover-up of his mental and physical decline?
Well, to be clear, there's nothing wrong with needing a wheelchair, right? I mean, FDR can remind us of that and his extraordinarily successful presidencies.
No, he didn't have pictures of himself in it. I mean, though he too kept that from the public.
He would never have been elected in the television age.
Yeah.
We all know that.
But I think more to the point, the president's inability to communicate his message or really effectively to communicate and connect at all was damning, not just for him and not just for our party, but for our country. Joe Biden and those around him had one job, and they failed at that job. That job was to stop Donald Trump. It was the whole rationale behind Biden's reelection bid, and he would say that in his own words. He said, "I'm the only guy who can do this," and he failed. And he also failed his vice president, who got off to a much too late start, I think, to effectively mount a successful campaign. And he ultimately failed this country. And look, that's hard for a lot of Democrats to say. And I understand why so many of them have not said that. We love and adore Joe Biden for his lifetime of service in the Senate as vice president and president of the United States. He was an extraordinarily effective commander in chief for this country. He did so many great things. But the most important thing that he had to do for all of us, he failed at. And he alone, because his desk is where the buck stops, has to shoulder that blame. And it also extends to anyone who helped to cover that up or who didn't do the right thing when they knew what the right thing was to do. And so we both have to admit that and say that out loud, as difficult as that can be. But we must also learn from that and not commit those same mistakes and not paper over things that we know are going to be deeply damaging, not out of politeness or obligation, look past people who are currently failing or will fail us if they stay in these same positions. We have to be ruthless, absolutely ruthless about power. And this is one thing that I've learned from Republicans. I sometimes think that Democrats care more about being right or being polite than they care about being in power, while Republicans care more about being in power than they care about anything else. And they care about the Constitution, the rule of law, or democracy, anything. I'm not saying Democrats have to go that low, but I think we have to be absolutely aggressive and ruthless about winning power, keeping it, and then using it to deliver for the American people. And that is not what we did in 2024.
Republicans, or at least Donald Trump, also seem to care a lot about money. Beto, what do you make of this crypto scam that Donald Trump is running between meme coin, between crypto? It's like to the tune of he's already made $300 million, but there's also the number $1 billion being thrown around by what his family could stand to make. What are we supposed to do about this as it happens in broad daylight?
This is corruption, pure and simple. This is the president of the United States and his family enriching themselves at public expense, using, for example, a tour of the White House to lure more tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of investment in his meme coin without any transparency for the press, the media, the American public to be able to hold him accountable. It is a Department of Justice that is in total fealty to the president and not an independent operator, ensuring that all of us are held equally to the same standard of law. And perhaps what is most chilling about this, to your point, Allison, this is happening in broad daylight. It's being widely reported. The people of this country know exactly what is happening, but Trump and those closest to him don't seem to care. It's almost as if they think there will not be another moment of accountability, like an election in 2026 that could produce a Democratic majority in the House of Representatives, that could subpoena witnesses, that could force the president to the kind of accountability and perhaps his administration to the kind of justice that this country and the rule of law really deserve. So it just, for me, further makes the point that we can't wait until 2026. We really have to push back. We have to protest. We have to march. We have to gather. We have to use the power of people to expose this. I think only that can force him to change course or can help us to replace him in due time in 2028 or provide a check against him in 2026. But it has to be mobilized right now.
Speaking of 2028, quickly, all the energy, as you know, is with AOC and Bernie Sanders drawing tens of thousands everywhere they go around the country. Is that where the energy will be in 2028, or would you like to see a Governor Newsom, a Governor Shapiro, an Amy Klobuchar? Give me some of the names that you think could bring the Democrats out of the woods.
I love everyone that you just mentioned. And I'll say this. I think the reason that so much of the attention is being placed on AOC and Bernie and to a degree Tim Walz and others who are out there is because they are out there. They're doing the work. And I think many other Democrats, for whatever reason, appear to be waiting and watching, overly cautious and careful, maybe reading the wind, checking with the weatherman to find out which way it's blowing before they get out there. I'm inspired and encouraged by the people who aren't waiting for that. And I understand for some Democrats, they're saying to themselves, well, I don't want to put myself out there. I don't know what the message is. I don't know what the answer is. And that's okay. I don't think anybody knows what the message or the answer is yet. We're confronting something literally unprecedented and seriously existential to the future of this country. But precisely because no one person can know the full answer to that, it's incumbent upon all of us to bring as many people together.
You know I want names, Beto. You know I just want a couple of names. Don't filibuster me, man.
No, I don't have one for you. I like all of them. And I think, perhaps the danger is putting all of the eggs in one basket, putting everything behind one golden ticket. I think I was talking to someone earlier today. You look at, someone like Cuomo in New York, and you look at someone like Ro Khanna in California. They couldn't be more different, right? In style, in temperament, in approach. But they're both important voices for this country right now. And I'd love to see how each of them is able to do on the national stage, including everyone else that you mentioned. So people are finding their voice and their way. And from that, real leadership's going to emerge. So I'm optimistic.
I ain't getting it.
And he gave you two names.
Cuomo, yeah, Ro Khanna,
Yes,
Governor
I
Cuomo.
like that.
That's a ticket.
But Beto, what about you? What about you? Where are you with considering a run for something?
I'm open to it. I'm really just trying to be useful and helpful. I think, like a lot of people, I just want to make sure that I'm meeting the moment. And I think the most powerful thing I can do right now is continue to stay on the road and bring people together in these town hall meetings where, I've got a microphone, but there's another microphone and everyone in the room has access to it. We're all listening to one another. I think that helps us realize that we're not alone and isolated. We're not as divided as we might have thought that we were, and that we can organize together to take action. So if that ends up leading to a candidacy, well, great. If instead, I stay out there as a volunteer, helping to organize and mobilize people, that's great as well. I just, I want to be able to look my kids in the eye and, meet my maker someday and say, when all this crazy stuff was happening in 2025, that I did everything I could with what I had, exactly where I was here in Texas. And I feel pretty good about that right now.
Speaking of all this crazy stuff, we like to ask all our guests, because this podcast is called the Sanity Podcast, for their kind of dose of sanity. How do you escape all the madness? How do you get through it? I know you love the punk rock music. I don't think you play anymore, but what's your dose of sanity for us?
Yes, sometimes playing music with my son Henry, who's just fantastic. But this morning, we live in the mountains, in the Rocky Mountains here in West Texas, in the Chihuahuan Desert. I took our 3 puppies up in the Franklin Mountains for a trail run, and it was just beautiful. The sun is breaking over Mount Franklin. It's just the most peaceful, serene setting. And as I was coming back on the other side of the loop, my 18-year-old son, Ulysses, was coming up the same trail, running it, which I just felt like a victory right there to see this kid out there working out in the mornings. It's just, remembering how lucky I am to be alive and how fortunate we are to live in this beautiful place here in El Paso, Texas. So that's my sanity right now.
That's beautiful. You're doing something right. You have a musician, you have a kid who gets up early and exercises and goes out in nature. That's a win.
That ain't bad.
Yeah.
All right. Last question. I'm going to give you a choice. Either what are you drinking? And that doesn't have to be booze. It can be. Or what are you streaming? Netflix, Hulu, whatever. So what are you drinking or what are you streaming? You can answer both, though.
Yeah. So I'm streaming right now this excellent show on Apple TV called Dope Thief. Have you guys seen it?
No, never even heard of it.
It's these two guys who pose as DEA agents and do these kind of fake raids on small-time drug dealers to steal their stash and steal their money. And as you can predict, this plan goes absolutely off the rails, and they run into some really big trouble. And we're 2 episodes in. The acting, the writing, the directing, everything is fantastic. And it's interesting. I haven't read about it. It really didn't hit the radar. We just accidentally ran across it, and it's our favorite show in the house right now.
Is it a comedy?
No, it is. It like my wife Amy is
not
like,
taking comedy from that, did you?
Because I was hoping that like hilarity would ensue. Like they
No.
they become DEA agents and hilarious things happen.
no.
There'd be a curveball.
Your blood pressure, your heart rate is through the roof. Like my wife Amy is like, she's like, I don't think I can take any more of this show. I am so anxious by the end of every episode. It's really, really well done. And, like you were asking earlier about, how you find serenity. I think there's something about shows like that where you're so engrossed in the character and their dilemma and their crisis. You just don't have headspace to ruminate or worry or, be stressed out about your own life. And there's something that's, it's a little bit of a gift to find something like that. So that's my recommendation for streaming, Dope Thief.
I like it. No, I think escapism is for sure one of the great means of sanity. But I mean, I remember that with Breaking Bad. It was I couldn't watch it before I went to bed.
Yeah, see, I can't do
It's
high
stressful.
anxiety
Yeah.
shows. I
Yeah.
can't do them.
So this isn't for you.
No, although I am watching Paradise, which is
Yeah.
anxiety inducing right now.
Yes. But
Which is a great show if you're looking for one on Hulu about basically the end of the world and living under a mountain. And
Yeah.
it's a really interesting show. But
I haven't seen that one yet. I'm going to look it up.
Check it out. Well, former Congressman Beto O'Rourke, it's wonderful to see you. Thanks so much for giving us exactly what you're doing, and your prescription for the Democrats is always really interesting to check in with you.
Thanks for having me. Good to be with you all.